So I got a message a few weeks ago and he laid out his whole situation, his rent, his debt, what he had saved. And at the end, he said something kind of like, I just don't think I can afford to do what you did right now. I don't have enough saved up yet. And I kind of sat with that for a sec because he wasn't wrong necessarily about the numbers. He just had the question backwards. The question isn't, can you afford to leave? The question is, can you afford to keep staying? The guy who sent me that message was from Texas, but honestly, it could have been from anywhere. I get versions of that same message from Canadians, Americans, Brits, it doesn't matter. Aussies. The geography changes, but the math problem is still the same. Everybody's calculating the wrong number. Here's what I mean. When most people think about moving abroad, whether it's, Belize, Portugal as of late is in the news, Mexico, wherever, the first thing they do is look at their savings account and ask, is there enough in here to make this happen? And it feels logical. It feels responsible. It's what you're supposed to do, right? We've been on Caye Caulker for 2.5 years now. We run a shop here. We live here. And I can tell you from the inside that the people who never make the move aren't usually stopped by money, even though many of them think they are. They're stopped by a math problem that they set up wrong from the start. So let's talk about what staying actually costs. And I'm not just talking rent. I'm talking the full number, the one that nobody adds up, because if you added it up, you'd have to do something about it. In Canada, right now, 2026, 85% of Canadians say living paycheck to paycheck is their norm. That's not a rough patch. Normal. 1 in 10 say their income doesn't even cover basic costs. The country is officially, technically, in a recession, even though it's just by 1%, and the average family of four is spending around 17,500 Canadian bucks just on groceries every year. That's roughly $1,500 a month. Just food. And it's going up another 4 to 6% this year alone. In the US, the number's similar. It's around $1,400 a month for a family of four on a moderate spend. So roughly the same paying, just in different currencies. And housing's eating 30 to 40% of income in most major cities on top of that. More in places like Austin, Denver, Miami, where costs exploded and never really came back down. A third of American households describe themselves as financially insecure right now. But the thing is, groceries and rent are the numbers people actually track. What they don't track is everything else. In Canada, you got a car, almost guaranteed. Because outside of maybe Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal, you basically need one. Average car insurance in Ontario alone runs around $2,000 a year, and that's before gas, before maintenance, before the winter tires that you swap twice a year like clockwork. Never mind another $400 or $500 or $600 on your car payment. Add heating, something we don't have here. Add the hydro bill. For Americans watching, we call electricity hydro because it's water generated a lot of the time. And 3 months a year, you're spending more on food delivery and eating out because it's minus 20 degrees Celsius and nobody wants to cook. Americans, you got your own version of this. The car is basically mandatory almost everywhere. Health insurance, if you're not covered through work, can run you $400, $500, $600 a month for a single person. And I've heard from people down here upwards of $1,200 sometimes just for your insurance. And if you are covered through work, you're probably just staying in a job you don't love, partly because of that coverage. That's a cost too. It just doesn't show up on a bank statement. None of this is in the savings account calculation. Nobody's subtracting the psychological cost of a 45-minute commute each way in the dark in the snow. Nobody's pricing what 8 months of winter does to a person over time. But it's all real and it's compounding. Meanwhile, and I want to be straight with you here because I'm not trying to sell you a fantasy, the average cost of living in Belize runs about 49% less than Canada. Rent specifically, 62% lower. Compared to the US, that gap is pretty similar. You're looking at roughly half the monthly spend for a comparable lifestyle, and that's if you're living like a tourist. If you figure out how to live more like a local, that number gets even more interesting. A couple here, no kids, real numbers, can live well on $2,000 to $2,500 US dollars a month. That includes rent, food, electricity, getting around, no car payment, no car insurance, no winter tires, at least here on Caye Caulker. But in the less touristy areas of Belize, you're gonna want a car. But either way, sure as shit, it won't take you an hour to get to work. Before anybody jumps in the comments, yeah, some things cost more here. Imported goods get hit with duties. AC runs up the electricity bill. Flights aren't cheap, we'll get to that. But the base number, just existing number, it's not even close. So if the math is this obvious, why doesn't everybody just go? Thought about it a lot because it's not stupidity. People are sending me these messages aren't dumb. They're doing exactly what they were taught to do. Here's the trap. When the place you're living keeps getting more expensive, slowly, year over year, your brain doesn't register it as a crisis. It registers it as status quo, as normal. You adjust. You cut something here, you absorb something, the little pay bump, don't worry, it's going to cover this now. You tell yourself it's temporary. Things are going to stabilize, you'll get a raise, the market will correct, blah, blah, blah. And while you're waiting for all of that, you're running a calculation in your head that goes something like, I need X amount saved before I can make a move. But that X keeps moving because everything around you keeps getting more and more expensive. So the goalpost shifts, and then you adjust again, and then you wait again. I mean, if you're not getting a 4 or 5% raise every single year just to break even, you're effectively taking a pay cut every single year, and most people aren't getting that. So the gap widens whether you notice it or not. Kind of sucks, right? Psychologists actually have a name for part of this. It's called status quo bias. Basically, the brain's wired to treat staying put as the safe default, even when staying put is objectively costing you more than moving. The risk of change feels bigger than the cost of staying, even when the cost of staying is enormous and compounding every single month. I call it the comfortable rut. It's not a groove if you feel stuck. And here's what makes it worse. The people around you, your family, your friends, your coworkers, they're in the same trap. So when you start doing the math out loud, they don't say, yeah, the numbers don't add up here either. They say things like, oh, what about healthcare? Or, but what about stability? Or, isn't it dangerous there? They ask those questions because it's easier to poke holes in your math than to sit and look at their own. And I'm not immune to this, by the way. Stacey and I had this conversation for years before we actually moved. For real, years. And the whole time, the cost of staying kept going up. The whole time, the gap between what we were spending in Ontario and what we were spending here kept widening. Every year we waited, we paid for it. My only regret is not having done it earlier. That's the trap. It's not that people can't afford to leave. It's that the longer they wait, the more leaving costs them. And they're accounting for it on the wrong side of the balance sheet. So here's what that decision actually looked like for us. It wasn't we saved enough, now we can go. It was more like we ran the real number one day. Everything going on in Ontario. The rent, the car insurance, the heat, the eating out, the stuff you buy because you're stressed and buying things feels like doing something. And then we looked at what we need to actually live, somewhere like in Belize. And the gap was already there. We first even looked at Utila, which is a tiny island beside Roatan in Honduras. That gap had been there for a while. We just never actually looked directly at it. We didn't frame it as leaving forever. That's the thing I'd want anybody watching this to take away. We called it an experiment. We said, let's try this for a year. If it's a disaster, we go back. Ontario will still be there. Tim Hortons will still be there. Blah, blah, blah. What we didn't expect was how fast the math started working in the other direction. Within a few months of being here, we weren't bleeding out the same way. Baseline cost of just existing dropped enough that the income we already had, the online stuff, POD business, actually had room to breathe. It wasn't that we made more money. It was the money stopped disappearing as fast. Once we stopped going out every night like we did for the first 3 months. And that's the income piece I want to be straight with you about. Because this is where a lot of move abroad content kind of glosses over something important. This works if your income travels. If you're tethered to a physical location for your paycheck, the math is harder. Not impossible, there are paths, but definitely harder. The people who make this work cleanly are the ones who sorted out that income question before they landed here. Remote job, freelance online business, rental income back home factors in, something that follows you that way. That was us. The print on demand business, or POD we call it, didn't care what island we were on. The shop here became an extension of that, something we built because we could, not because we had to. It's honestly just fun, and Stacey wanted to get out of the house a little bit more. And I'll tell you something, the walk to work here takes about 15 minutes, sometimes longer because I'll stop and talk. In Ontario, my commute before I quit was 50 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes each way in a car in the dark in February. Neither of those commutes shows up in the cost of living calculator, but one of them was costing me something I couldn't get back. All right, real talk here. I've been throwing numbers at you for the last 10 minutes and the numbers are real. The math holds up, but I want to be honest about something. Because most of these move abroad videos type thing don't say this stuff, but money isn't the thing stopping people. I mean, it's the reason people give. It's the reason I gave for years before we moved. We're not quite there financially, just need a bit more saved, maybe next year. But when I look back at that period and I think about what was actually happening, it was everything the savings account excuse let me avoid thinking about. Like, who am I if I'm not the guy with the career, the guy grinding towards something? What do I tell people at Christmas dinner when they ask what I'm doing? What if it doesn't work? And I have to come back and explain that to everyone who said it was a bad idea to begin with. Kind of shitty to think about, right? Tuck and tail. That stuff is real and it's heavy. And no spreadsheet fixes that kind of thing. The identity piece is the one that catches people off guard. You spend 20, 30 years building an answer to a question. What do you do? And then you're thinking about doing something where that answer either disappears or becomes something nobody around you understands. That's genuinely disorienting. It's unnerving. Feels weird. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But here's what I'll say. The financial excuse is comfortable because it's respectable. Nobody argues with, I can't afford it right now. It's responsible sounding and it closes the conversation. I'm scared my identity doesn't survive the move. That one's harder to say at a dinner table or even to your friends. The math problem I've been talking about this whole video is real. Probably paying more to stay than you think. The gap between what life costs in Canada or the US and what it costs somewhere like Belize, it's not small. And those numbers are documented and they're not moving in your favor. Things are going up here too, but not at the same pace if you have the income bit sorted out. But fixing the math is the easy part. The harder work is figuring out what you're actually afraid of and whether that fear is protecting you from something real or just protecting you from a decision you already know you want to make. We've been here 2.5 years. We opened a shop. We have a Great Dane who thinks he owns the beach. Stacey and I can walk to work. We know our neighbors. And we put less than $25 US in the gas tank every month. I don't say that to brag. I say it because 2 years before we moved, I told myself we couldn't afford it. I had the math backwards the whole time. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you've been sitting on this idea, moving abroad, leaving the grind, whatever version of this lives in your head, I want you to do one thing before you close this video. Don't Google how much do I need saved to move to Belize. Don't open a spreadsheet. Don't start a pros and cons list. Just add up what staying is actually costing you. The full number. Rent or mortgage, car, insurance, heat, the stuff you buy because you're burnt out, the commute you stopped noticing because you've been doing it so long, and add it up, honestly, for a single month. And come back and tell me if the math looks different. Drop it in the comments. Seriously, I read them all. You can probably see that by now. Tell me where you're at, Canada, the US, wherever, and what the number looks like when you actually add it all up. I'm curious. I think you might surprise yourself, but I'm also not always right. And if you stayed this far in and you're new here, we're Jay and Stacey. We left Ontario, moved to Caye Caulker, Belize with our Great Dane Tonka, and opened a pirate-themed gift shop on the beach. This channel's about what that actually looks like. Not the highlight reel, the real deal. And if that sounds like your kind of content, please stick around, give us a subscribe. We got a lot more of this on the way. And if you've already made a move, abroad or just away from the script you were handed, I genuinely would love to hear about it below. Every story in the comments makes the next video better. The next video, I'm going to talk about the thing that almost made us pack up and go back to Canada, and not what you'd expect. That one's coming soon. We'll see you in the next one.